Now, let's see. I just can't miss the chance to get your comments on the results from the survey that Johan and Monica had done. So could we please study that again and see here. This was a survey among the followers of In Use, and I simply wonder, don't you get depressed? Kim.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that all of us have plenty of employment in our futures. It's, I think cultural change takes a long time. It takes a long time. That's why conferences like this, frankly, guys, this is therapy, right? I'm not sure these numbers are that different around the world. I don't think it's just Sweden. I think these numbers are probably pretty consistent.
So you're not surprised?
No.
No? What do you say, Dave?
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. And in fact, I actually think it's probably even worse in the United States. You know, it's for every major Amazon, Apple, icon of UX, there are 20, 30 enterprise level companies out there that don't even have a designer, let alone a UX department. Lou Rosenfeld calls it the dark matter space that he's trying to concentrate on. It's the people that are project managers, business analysts, who are just trying to do the good fight, right? And they're not even at level one, And I think so. This actually seems more optimistic than I would think from the United States.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff.
I think the place to invest is moving people from 3 to 4. So I think if you can move people from invested to committed, based on these descriptions, so UX is critical, and the phrase there being executives are actively involved, that's going to pull up the rest of it. I think that if we can move more people from step 3 to step 4, that will actually reduce the people in step 2. It'll kind of magnetically pull people up, because once you get executives involved, and you get people in power, committed to building delightful experiences and great products, that's when you see the investment come into the organization, hiring the right people, empowering the right people. Chris's quote from, I forget who it was, he cited Uber, though, as something
right.
Like people are experiencing great product design. And when they do, that's when they invest in it. So I think moving people from 3 to 4 is the key, and I think that'll pull up the bottom half as well.
I guess you point out a very essential factor here, that the knowledge about UX has to be moved upwards in the organization.
Ironically, it has to be experienced, right?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of what that quote was about, right?
Experienced and understood, really.
Yeah, right, exactly. That executive, I'm sorry, I can't remember what company he was the executive for, but he
Comcast?
it was Comcast. Yeah, that's what it was. It was Comcast. He had experienced a delightful product that was thought through. The entire service was thought through, from the pixels on the screen to the delivery of the service itself, and he recognized that this was something that they were not investing in. And that's how the transformation happens.
Isn't it at the same time so that every executive loves to say phrases like the customer is always our most important actor and all that? I mean, is there some kind of misunderstanding when they answer like this? Dave?
Path to hell is laid with good intentions. So their intentions are in the right place, and intentions don't get you very far. So I think that there's, it's that same make it like my iPhone kind of stuff, where, yeah, I can see Uber, and I can see iPhone, or I can see Amazon, and I can say I want that without knowing, A, how that came into existence, and B, how that would translate to my context. So I think it is about the understanding piece that you were alluding to. That really is challenging. And I think the other thing is the misunderstanding of customer equals purchase activity, right? So they're focused on the point of purchase a lot, as opposed to everything that surrounds that kind of stuff.
Kim, anything to add there?
I would say that the intent may be genuine to get better at doing this stuff. And I think what people don't understand is that this is not like installing a new phone system. It's not just a plug and play operation. It's a deep cultural change.
Yeah.
And so they're in a phase that I think of as bargaining. If I have the salad, I can have the chocolate cake. and they think that UX change is going to be easy. And this is a natural phase that everybody goes through on their way to really getting good at this stuff. So it's not necessarily discouraging. It's just normal.
Yeah. Should we take a look at the results from the ELO ranking then about the question we asked before the break? What do you find most challenging when organizing teams to create great UX? Okay. Time and budget gets higher priority than securing great UX. Managers lack understanding. The team has limited mandate. Not all. Just read it through quickly and digest and see what is your direct reaction to this.
I think this speaks directly to what Kim was just saying, is that an executive experiences something delightful and says, make us the Uber of cable television services, and then they go through and they realize, oh, this is really hard work, and we have to actually invest in this, and the cost becomes evident in there. And so the challenge for the folks who are in leadership positions within those organizations is to then translate the conversation from, oh, we're hiring another designer, to what is the business reason that we're actually going to invest in this? Where is the ROI? You know, I hate to be the guy who keeps bringing up lean and agile, but if you've read The Lean Startup, Eric Ries wrote a book called Lean Startup a couple of years ago. If you've read that book and you're a UX person, there's a significant chunk of that book that is user experience work that he describes: customer research, prototyping, interviews, right? Those types of things. And the reason why that book was so successful is because he wasn't a designer or a researcher or a UX person. He wrote a business book in business language targeted at a business audience. And I think that's the language of the conversation that we need to have once they've experienced great experiences. I keep saying experience. But once the light bulb has gone on and they're thinking about investing, we can't continue to talk about pixels and animations and transitions. We have to talk about business, because that's what matters to these folks ultimately.
Dave, would you have answered like this?
I was doing it, and mine was pretty close to this. I think, one or two things flip-flop, but definitely 1 through 7 is pretty much exactly what I would have where that is. In my organization, the location stuff is pretty important, and technical domain knowledge is, because it's such a technical tool, gets in the way a little bit more. But those top 7 things are still issues in one way or another.
Yeah. And what about you, Kim?
I would say the top 5 things on the list all say the same thing to me, which is the organization doesn't value user experience. And so that's not at all surprising to me. And I think the rest are tools and training and process, which are all very manageable things. So all 5 of those first ones, that's the work.
Yeah.
That's the work, is getting people to value what we do.
So if we take this away now and sort of start the discussion from the beginning again. We have heard today, so we can change slides whenever you like, back to the names. We've heard from you earlier today, Kim. We've heard from you, Jeff. And you have told us a lot about obstacles, problems that you run into. Let's take the other angle and say you start building a really good, innovative team for a very interesting project. What are the core factors you're looking for when you start off, Jeff?
Well, I mean, that was the crux of my talk was the answer, is the 40-minute version answer to that question. But at its core, it's providing it's providing teams the resources, the autonomy to make decisions based on a continuous conversation that they are having with the market and then with the business as well. So it's empowering the teams. It was number 3 on that list, and giving them the authority to make the decisions, because ultimately they're the closest to that feedback. They're the closest to the customer. They are usually the most qualified people to make those types of tactical decisions. And that's the key. If you can give them that autonomy, everything else will fall into place, process and tools and so forth. There's a trust there, an implicit trust from the organization that says, we trust you to make these decisions. We know but they're small decisions. So if we're wrong, at the very least, the impact won't be catastrophic.
What do you say, Kim?
Well, obviously I would start with the culture, because you're generally not, most of us don't get to design a team from scratch where there's no existing culture in the organization. So one is being culturally sensitive. Generally agree with what Jeff has said. The other thing I would add is that I think we have to consider our team structures based on the kind of design problem that we're solving as well. For example, I wouldn't use the same team structure in terms of skill sets to design a giant, sprawling enterprise resource planning platform that I would use to design a mobile phone app. Because you need a different set of skills. You need people who are really good at details and understanding legacy systems in the one case. You need people who are really good at, say, brand and so forth in the other case. So I think we have to tailor a little bit to the design problem too.
And both to Dave and to you, Kim, do you agree with Jeff about the idea of having a certain size of the team, and also the issue about being scattered around or not? I mean, is it really impossible to build a global team, according to what Jeff said?
I'm going to fall on the "it depends" line. But I know I can speak to my context, which is a 15-year-old enterprise hardware system integrator software company blend of things. And the issue on team size, that one I can kind of see, but at a certain point, you're creating hierarchy then, because there are so many moving parts in my system, like the enterprise. It's the environment she was talking about just a second ago, where there's just we're building an ecosystem of platforms that all need to have a consistency to them, from customer facing to support facing, and at a certain point they break down into little chunks that can then work for 8-person teams, but those 8-person teams have to then know what their chunk is doing. But then there's the other, so you start building a pyramid, and what I've noticed is the pyramid's not actually helping that much. It's starting to create information flow problems as well. So the scale issue is, I think, a problem that hasn't been solved as neatly yet. Definitely not in my organization. And in terms of the co-location piece, I have seen successful global teams.
But even when one sleeps, when the other don't?
Yeah, but what I haven't seen is successful design teams globally. There's something about, and this probably speaks to my interpretation of what Jeff is talking about, which is that if you want to be creative with each other, you really need to be awake at the same time. And I would say in person, the transparency that is required, the passive openness of that kind of open collaborative, it just is so much stronger when you can do that. However, the global economy is real, and there's real reason to hire globally, to get new insights that you wouldn't get if you hired globally and brought them in, or didn't hire globally and just hired locally, that are important to creativity as well. And I think that there's a real opening for tool development to enable distributed creative teams better. So.
Kim?
I would say that I agree with the core principle, which is that you want the smallest team you can manage that has all the expertise you need on it. But I think one of the keys is that the way you formulate that team is going to vary by culture. And so one thing I've had good success with is in layering teams. In other words, making the outside boundary of the team somewhat fluid. Because there's interesting evidence in the literature that matches my experience as well, which is that the generative unit, the people who are sitting there saying, what should the design be, and sketching together, that 2 people is an ideal problem-solving unit because they move very fast, but they question each other's assumptions. In my experience, you can add a 3rd person to that mix and still have that work. When you start adding a 4th or 5th person, boom, it just slows way down. So I like to think of it as kind of the avocado model of teams. Okay. At the core, there's the generative unit. And then you have the creamy center, which is probably your 2 pizza team, right? The small number of people who are really
pizza,
essential to formulating the solution.
Right.
And that around that, you have all the people who believe that they are stakeholders in that, not all of whom really are, let's be honest. But who need but who need to check in periodically, say once a month, and be informed because it does somewhat affect their work, right? And I think that distinguishing what is the work of the generative team, what is the work of that close collaborative team, and what is really the task of that larger team. Is this a generative meeting? Is it a refinement meeting? Is it just an informational meeting? And I find that helps teams a whole lot with some of that thrash.
But let me ask, then how do you reduce, if you've got a generative team surrounded by a collaborative team, how do you reduce that envy of, well, those guys get to do all the cool concepting work and then we just have to execute their vision on this, which is a situation that I've run into over time, right? If the generation of ideas is limited to a couple of people on the team, there's a dynamic there that can be problematic. Have you seen that addressed?
I think that boundary has to be a little bit flexible, right? And certainly it's not that other people can't have ideas. And in those refinement meetings, ideas come up and you do start to generate. But I think sitting 8 people down in a room saying, okay guys, let's draw on the blank whiteboard all together. I think when you're trying to work through complex interactions, oh my God, that's slow.
Well, I mean, fair enough. The facilitation plays a role in those meetings as well.
Sure.
Right?
But I think often that's also a very expensive meeting when you're doing complex design too. So,
is it more of a pomegranate instead of an avocado? Where there's lots of generative teams, and they mix and match, and so there's more than one seed even within the 8, and they get to move, and then you find moments to combine.
Again, I think it depends on the nature of the design problem, right? I think if you have simple, self-contained design problems, that's one thing. I think if you have a really big, complex product, I think that's different. And I think that sometimes that small team structure gets a little brittle when you have a big, complex product, too.
Mm-hmm. So. It's interesting to bring it up really quick. I just want one last point. I don't have a produce-based metaphor for
some other food will
right,
do.
Well, but I do talk a lot, when I do work with companies, I do talk a lot about orbital teams. So not unlike, it's a model. So when you said avocado and you described it, it resonated with me a little bit because so for the orbital model that I have is that the nucleus is the core product team, right? At the very least, it's product design and engineering. At the very least, it's not to say it's the only people, and design is very inclusive of whatever design you do. Right. Product design, engineering, but then in orbit of that's the team that's working together closely every day, right? And then in orbit of that team are stakeholders, and then the other functions, especially in a large company, that team needs to interact with to do its work, but that can't spend every day with them. Brand, IT, legal, compliance, regulatory, that type of thing, who have a stake, who have something to contribute at some point, and so the teams create some kind of a service level agreement with those orbital members that say, we get 10% of this particular lawyer's time to make sure that the copy that we write can go out on the website so that we can continue to work in an efficient fashion instead of writing a 200-page content deck and then shipping it off to legal and waiting 9 weeks for it to come back.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not exactly the same of what you just said, but
It's close.
It's close.
Let me give you another example. I think that nucleus varies a little bit depending on the design problem.
Okay.
So at Patients Like Me, for example, if we're working on a tweak to the news feed and the algorithms about exactly what content gets displayed, that nucleus is going to be a designer and an engineer, because it's so much about how the code is written and what behavior we're enabling. If the thing we're designing is a new disease measure, then that nucleus is going to be a designer and a scientist.
Right.
Right? And then once those people feel like, okay, this is heading in the right direction, then you pull in the engineer and say, is there anything funky in here that we need to problem solve together around?
Got it.
So.
Makes sense.
I also want to ask a couple of questions about continuity, but I also want to invite you now to at least 10 minutes of interaction. Take the chance to ask questions which you didn't get the chance before today. We have the hand microphones, don't we? And I need help to see where you are so we can get all the questions in. Anybody waving here? Yes.
Yes, hello, Arto Valtonen. I work at Sigma Technology in Karlskrona. How important do you think it's to find a real problem? Because we are talking a lot about the business opportunities, but isn't the starting point a real UX problem? And what kind of experience do you have in finding the UX problem?
Mm-hmm.
It's critical, so I'll jump in, because if you're not solving a real problem, you're absolutely wasting your time. And so the first question that you should seek to answer, the first hypothesis that you should test is, does this problem exist? Right? And so the way to do that is typically through customer conversations, is to actually go find the people who you think have this problem, and first of all find out if they exist, and if they do they have a particular issue? Well, if they don't, right, I mean, we make assumptions about who we're building products for and what the pain points and their needs are, but we don't necessarily know that to be true. And so let's go find those people. And if we can't find them, that's a great finding, right? If we do find them, then let's figure out if this particular issue that we think is important is actually important to them or is affecting their day. And again, those are really easy. There are easy techniques to find. It's research, right? It's going out and recruiting and finding people where they work or where they hang out and asking them these questions and verifying that indeed there is a problem here. And then the next step before, again, if you identified folks and they do exist and you've identified a problem that they have and they actually have that problem, is would they actually value a solution to that problem or the solution that you're thinking of? Right, because I mean, maybe we have this problem, but it's fine. I've figured out how to work around it, and it'd be pretty tough to shift me off of the life hack that I've built in to do this. Right, those are the initial sets of conversations.
Your comment, Kim?
I would say that I probably have a list of top 5 questions that I ask on pretty much a daily basis, and what problem does that solve is definitely in that list. I ask it of stakeholders. I ask it of teams that are showing me design. I think unless we have agreement on that as a team, there's no point. So, underlining what Jeff said.
I concur.
Dave also?
I concur.
+1.
Okay, one more question here.
Hi, I'm Karin Eklund from Ascom. I have just a comment on the business aspects of user experience, because sometimes I think the term user experience is quite misleading. Because if we don't know what business that we really try to strive for, what goal we have, we really can't create user experience to support that. And I think also user experience as a term sometimes makes it difficult to talk about the business parts when it comes to talking to managers and so on. Is that something you have met as well?
Yeah.
I'll start there. I think it's actually a big problem for a lot of people who come from a classical user-centered design approach, because they were centered on users and they're not trained in the ways of manager speak or executive speak. And that impacts on many, many different levels. One, just not knowing how to express, business impact. I mean, Ingrid was talking about impact. Just where is the impact going to be for the people who are funding the solutions that we're working on, as well as the impact for the customer too. But they have to both be balanced, and you have to have a language and understand and share in methods that lead you to that understanding and communication system.
More comments on that? Kim?
Something that I've always done as a consultant is start every project with stakeholder interviews so that we can get at exactly what the business is trying to accomplish. And that works very well. What I often see, though, is that in-house teams don't do that same thing. And I think it's partly the embarrassment factor, right? You think, well, I work here, aren't I supposed to know what the business goals are? So the way that I handle that is I say, hey, Dave, I know what this company's all about and so on, but I'd really like your take on this particular project. I'd like to hear about your goals for it, right? Mm-hmm. I just flattered him. I fed his ego. Of course he's going to spend time with me. And then I have more permission to ask the dumb questions that I want to ask, which actually get me to exactly the right answers.
So both parts think that the other one understands? Is that what you mean? Or?
Well, I think that when you work in-house at a company, people are often embarrassed to ask fundamental questions like, why are we doing this project? Yeah. Because they feel like, well, they're going to think I'm not with it, right?
Or that you're insubordinate.
Yeah, that too.
Right.
And so I think there's kind of a job security anxiety there.
Sure.
But by playing up to somebody's ego, and I really want your insight on this, usually that you can get past that.
I have a couple of embarrassing questions soon. They will come soon. Any more?
Jeff, did you get to chime in on that?
There's one last note on the question. I just want to say this. I think great design is a brand value. And if your brand doesn't have great design as part of its brand promise, then the organization will never invest or buy into user experience and other kinds of design, and that's okay. Maybe you have other brand values that you work on, but I think to have a conversation with executives about great design, it has to be a part of the promise of the brand of your company.
Okay. Yes. Where are you?
Yes, hi. Here. Mats Björkgren, working at Elekta. I'm a part of a UX team, and we work all agile and so on. We have worked for a long time here in Sweden, but in the US they have just started. But my real question is, on co-location and distributed, I mean, I like the UX team should be in one place. That would be really good for the UX team. But on the other hand, to gain acknowledgement and get buy-in from the people, we have to be at both sites, or actually more sites. But do you have any suggestions how to make that way off, or what do you say? How to think? Do you understand?
I'm not sure I understood, but you did.
Well, I think, if I understand you correctly, you're asking about the trade-offs of, do you keep the whole UX team together, or do you distribute them because the rest of the team is split up? Is that right?
Yeah, or to gain, to get buy-in and to get people to understand the value of UX, you have to have people present at that site. Otherwise, they never see us.
Okay.
But on the other hand, then we will be split up.
You know, in my experience, the biggest barrier to the biggest reason, I think, to have co-located teams is about trust. And it's about, do I know Jeff well enough and trust him well enough that, of course, I think to ask him this question? It's kind of the out of sight, out of mind issue more than anything. So for that reason, I would rather split up the UX team and put them where the other folks are, because I think for us as UX folks, it's easier for us to trust because we understand how we all think for the most part. Whereas, say, an engineer may not. So that's probably the choice I would make. I don't know if you guys differ.
Agree.
I was going to. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but there are other types of contexts, and so depends on where the maturity level of your UX team is the other issue, and if you're building a UX team, it's important for them to stay co-located. So that they're managed well, and the competency the competency is built with strong foundation. And I think in the beginning, it's safer to do that and bridge the distance relationships that way. That would be a different approach. Because I think once you start sending out your designers, they're sort of isolated and alone, and designers really need each other. In at least I've seen where my designers are alone, they're not as functional. As
I would agree. It's the first few years,
Yeah.
right? The first few years of a designer's career, they really do need the close mentoring and each other.
Yeah.
I think my remark was assuming you had a fully functional designer. In that case, I would split them up. So totally agree.
Jeff, you had something to add here.
No, I think that it's my experience complements some of that in saying that, you know, when you put an inexperienced designer on a cross-functional team, the tendency has been they more often than not they've been steamrolled by their colleagues when their opinions differ. So yes, I would agree that after there's a certain level of maturity that needs to happen when you send them out of the nest.
Yeah. Well, and the same is true of engineers too.
Agreed.
Right? I
Fine,
mean, I think
thanks.
if you have a
We have
junior
time
engineer,
for one more.
Yes, my name is Anna Sortling, and I'm working at Scania. And I'm curious, we're talking about this arguing about, you know, why should UX be important? And I think it's fairly easy to come up with the arguments when it's an external product, an external system. But I am basically only working with internal systems. And of course, the easy argument is the efficiency. You know, we get the internal production to be more efficient. But I'm curious, could you offer any more arguments for the internal systems that you have used and that are successful?
I can come up with a lot. Let's have a drink later. No.
Yeah, why not?
So I have an example. Hope my team's not watching back home. So the example is our billing department is not very responsive to the user experience team, and then they go off and they create rules in the system that then impact the support team, which then impact the customer. And the example in this case is they want to save money on the time spent on accounting. So if any European customer wants to start up in one of our systems, they have to be a business, not a person, because we want to avoid VAT processing as an American company. Right? So their accounting reasons are all good, except we speak to developers directly as a business, and it just shut off a whole chain of entry point acquisition for us. So that decision on the back end that is making all their lives easier is going to bubble up and impact. And the question I ask every team that I'm working with is they may have this great reason for something, and then I say, and then what happens? Right? And it keeps going, and it almost always bubbles up to the top in some way, shape, or form. It's like I said before, the baggage handler is just as important as the service agent at the gate. You know, they're all involved, no matter how back end you think they are. It's one system.
Thank you, Dave. Let me then use one of my naive ones. Have you ever put together, worked in a so-called dream team in these cases?
Kim has.
Close.
I mean,
Close.
Tell us about
Go
it.
ahead, Jeff.
I mean, I strongly believe in the people who work in our organization, and I believe that when we staff a project, we staff dream teams. If you know anything about me, you know I'm not a fan of titles like guru and rock star and that kind of thing, because we strive for collaboration. But the folks that we hire, a dream team. So what is a dream team? I think really is where this comes down to. I think a dream team is a highly collaborative, trusting team that is
With very high skills, of
yeah,
course.
that is mature in their process, and those are the people that we hire, and those are the teams that we put together on the projects that we work on. And I would argue that any one of the teams that we staff are dream teams based on who we hire for. So we hire for qualities and skill sets that make that possible for everyone that we work with.
What about you, Kim?
I would say hire for qualities is really important. Skills I can train. Values, not so much.
Yeah.
I would say a dream team is a group of people that I can trust, who are at least good enough at what they do, ideally better. And I think that you know you're in a dream team when you feel like they make you better, because they ask you challenging questions and they push you, and yet you trust that that's for good reasons. I think that's the dream team, is when you set up that value.
Dave.
I was just thinking back on the teams that I've worked on, and one of those teams I would call a dream team at this point, and that was the team when I was at Motorola, and from VP all the way down to the designer, it was quality, shared values, real sense of collaboration and trust were all there, and just and one of those core values that I think was really important for that team that I always take with me is the future can always be better. And we brought that in, and there was no cynicism. There was no cynicism allowed, I think. And that's what really made it a dream to work there, is the optimism.
So the final embarrassing question. I think I read this interview somewhere with Johan Berntsson, where you tell what is your dream project. Do you have one in the future, a dream project to run?
I think for me, a dream project is really moving into a domain. For me, it's about domain. More than anything else, it's moving into work in domains that really have an impact on social good and
like what?
Education, for example. That's for me. Okay. I've really been trying to do more work in that space, because I think education is ripe for disruption. There's a ton of opportunity, and the impact, the social impact of improving the education process is huge for society as a whole. So for me, that's a dream project, is it to be in a domain that I'm really passionate about.
Kim, are you now going to answer that I'm already in it?
My serious answer is things that make a difference in the world, like Jeff, and that's what drew me to patients like me. My only half-serious answer is, why is email still so horrible? I mean, really. You know, why don't we have a like button in email? That would clear out 20% of my inbox right there. You have the same problem.
Yes. That's the...
Dave.
I'm going to go a little different angle on this. Randy Posh, who did the last lecture at Carnegie Mellon University a few years ago, talked about, like, what did you want to be when you grow up, when you were 8 years old? Yep. And ever since I saw that video and been processing it, I always go back to that. What did I want to be when I grow up? And it always had to do with the ocean and marine life. And I think my dream job is to do design within an oceanographic research setting, to improve that, improve going deep, improve communications in that process, and being close to incredible ocean wildlife at the same time. I scuba dive and love that, but to design a submarine would be an incredible thing, And
excellent.
So yeah, that would be, it would just be incredible to be a part of a team that was doing that kind of work.
You're a man of such small ambition, Dave.
Right.
You want to change email. I can't think of anything more ambitious than that.
I thought you were going to say you wanted to open up a seafood restaurant.
You see what this proves? Stupid questions always get good answers.
Right.
Thank you very much, Dave Malouf, Kim Goodwin, Jeff Gothelf. Thank you very much indeed.